Welcome to another exciting adventure of beginning of the week announcement. We are entering into week 3, and pretty soon you're going to be starting your first essay. So I want to highlight a few things about essay 1, the requirements, and what I'm really looking for. You are going to be picking an author. This author can be a poet, a songwriter, or a musician. I'm going to actually be posting a very special um, announcement after this one that might be a little long, covering some music one, because I think that some of you may be wondering, is my musician that I like acceptable? And we'll talk about that in a minute. What I really want to focus on right now, though, is week 3. And you'll notice that we are still continuing along the vein of, concepts of self-realization, etc. We are starting to look at reader response criticism. Now, if you'll look in the assignment for skill building, week 3, you'll find that the reading response is actually a story by Charlotte, again with the yellow wallpaper. That's fine. I really wanted to focus on reader response criticism this week. In high school, I must have read The Great Gatsby at least 5 or 6 times. It got so bad that I absolutely hated the story. And in fact, my senior year of high school, I actually did not take an English class because I was so sick of that story. Traditionally, the way that it has been taught is you have a teacher who basically lectures for an hour on symbolisms, on what this is supposed to symbolize, who Gatsby is, and it gets to the point where you really don't actually read the story. You actually read it for the symbolism. You read it to satisfy the instructor, and so on. And my undergrad, I read it at least twice. And at UMass Boston, when I went for my undergrad, we read it again there once. I went to Bunker Hill for my associates. In grad school, I just thought I would never have to read it again. I was wrong. We actually had to read it, Great Gatsby, again, but this time we had to look at different literary theories. Literary theories are how we read stories, poems, plays, etc. And the first one, of course, I've mentioned in week 3 skill building is that the author holds the ultimate meaning to the story, and we cannot possibly know what the story is supposed to mean. Oftentimes, instructors will simply tell the traditional view of the story or poem that the author intended and leave it at that. There's no other interpretation. There's no other way to look at the story. And anybody who disagrees with the instructor is usually wrong, or at least in my view. In grad school, though, we were introduced to something called reader response criticism. Now, reader response criticism says that everything is open to individual interpretation, especially poetry, stories, etc. While the author's intent should will, if you can find it, some of these authors have been dead for hundreds of years, and it's really not, we're not quite sure what the author did intend. But on the whole, it's saying, okay, what is this poem meaning to me? How do I respond to this poem? That's exactly where we get the idea, reader response criticism. What are some of the things that the writer argues or points out within the poem or story that says something to me? We look at poems like Robert Frost's Mending Wall. We look at it in today's eyes. Obviously the way that Frost wrote it, there were no computers. There was nothing like that out there at the time. So we're really looking at a poem through 21st century eyes. What is it saying to us? Well, for me, it's simply saying, like many of you have highlighted, boundaries. Oftentimes we want to put up boundaries in our lives. Sometimes these are appropriate. Sometimes these are not. Robert Frost clearly, I think anyways, does not really see the need for a wall. And while he agrees that good fences do make good neighbors, it's not always the case. Now, I've asked some of you, what do you think about this in terms of today's technology? It's amazing to me how some people close themselves off and they never talk about themselves and they're never really saying anything. But then it's like, holy mackerel when you sign on to Facebook. And somebody just messaged me, I'm going to ignore it. And it really is incredible how we contradict ourselves by cutting ourselves off from people and then opening ourselves up to people at the same time. And it's interesting to see how, you guys have really taken a different interpretations of mending wall. Obviously, Sylvia Plath's metaphors that she's describing pregnancy. And you can interpret that in a multitude of different ways, looking at language, looking at how she's writing it. Somebody actually said, sounds like she's not too positive about this pregnancy. I mean, looking at the last line, she's on a train and can't get off. That was an interesting comment, something that even I haven't really thought of. So, hey, you guys still teach me. But at the same time, you really want to look at a poem and examine it. Look at the language, the style, the tone. Why does an author choose one word over another? Obviously, I don't expect you by the time you finish with this class to be experts on English composition in the sense of understanding the history of, literary theories and stuff like that. But it is important to understand language. It is important to understand tone, style. When you read a newspaper, and especially articles, you will find that there is a different tone, a different style for every article. If you read the New York Times, it's going to be biased toward the Democratic Party. If you read the Boston Globe, it's going to be biased towards the Democratic Party. If you read the Boston Herald, Wall Street Journal, a few others, you're going to find articles that are biased towards Republicans. Problem with bias, obviously, is you can't get to the truth. But that seems to be an acceptable problem today for some people anyway. So in conclusion here, reader response criticism is really what we're focusing on. We'll also notice in the skill building that there is an MLA in-text citations. I just want to brush up some things with you guys on in-text citations because it's something that I still see every semester. Students learn in-text citations and then they forget them. Now, in my next video, I'm going to actually completely go over Essay 1. Okay, I'm going to highlight some issues. I'm going to highlight some things that students have done in the past that have worked rather well. All right. Well, see you then. Bye.